Now, among those on the super committee is Pennsylvania Senator Pat Toomey. The Republican was elected in 2010, and he is our guest this morning. Senator, good to see you. Thanks for your time.
Good to see you, Chris.
The super committee had a very clear mandate here. Whatever legislation it produced was promised a clean up or down vote, and yet it wasn't able to produce anything.
Yeah.
Why not, Senator?
It's very frustrating. It was a big missed opportunity for enacting some pro-growth policies that would create the jobs that we need and bring our deficit under control. I think ultimately it reflects a big divide in Congress and probably to some degree in the American public. Our Democratic friends insisted that not a dime could be cut in spending anywhere of any kind unless there was a huge tax increase as part of the package, and they really pushed hard for $1 trillion tax increase. For myself and my Republican colleagues, we just felt that that's really bad policy. There's a great deal of spending cuts that we could and ought to be able to agree to: redundant programs, unnecessary, obsolete, excessive spending. You know, we've had a huge surge in spending in recent years. We've doubled federal spending since 2000. Federal spending as a percentage of our economy is 25% bigger than it was just 3 years ago. There's a lot we could and should have done on the spending side. Unfortunately, we just couldn't get the agreement.
Your Democratic friends, though, will say that these talks never really gained traction because of your party's unwillingness to raise taxes in any kind of meaningful form. Is that a fair criticism?
Well, no, it's not. But first of all, let's remember how we got here. You know, as recently as 2007, with the current tax rates that we have now, they'd been in effect for several years at that point, and we had an almost balanced budget. The deficit was only 1.2% of our total economy, a very, very manageable amount, and an amount which allows the total debt to actually shrink as a percentage of our economy. What's happened, what's different, is this huge surge in spending, the stimulus bills, the bailouts, nationalizing whole industry. And now the Democrats were suggesting, well, now that we've grown spending this massively, well, you guys need to agree to raise taxes to pay for it. I think the better approach would be to let's take spending back to roughly where it was, at least as a percentage of our economy. That would enable us to have strong economic growth and job creation, still cover the essential services of government. I think that would have been the approach, and that was the approach that I recommended. And by the way, even though I didn't think we ought to need to, as a practical matter, I acknowledge that to try to get an agreement, we'd have to put some new revenue on the table, and I did that.
And the plan that you proposed, it would have reduced most itemized deductions, it would have cut tax rates for everyone, and then adjusted the top 2 tax rates to generate about $250 billion over 10 years in new revenues. Your critics, though, say this is a plan that was based on a plan by Martin Feldstein, who was a Reagan advisor. They say that his plan would have generated $250 billion each year, whereas yours only generated $250 billion over 10. Could your plan have been more bold? And had it been more bold, might some Democrats have hopped on board?
If we had developed a plan to generate $250 billion in net new tax revenue each year for 10 years, that's $2.5 trillion over the decade, that would have created this economy. There's no way that the economy could withstand that kind of massive tax increase. So what I was recommending is that we have tax simplification. We've got a terrible code that's counterproductive. Lower rates for everybody. Offset the lost revenue from lower rates by reducing the value and the size of deductions. There are many mechanisms that one could use, and I was very flexible about how we would do that. And I acknowledge that in order to get an agreement, we would have to ask the folks in the top income brackets to pay a little bit more. In other words, to have the value of their deductions shrink even more than what would be necessary to get the rate down. Every economist has said this would be very pro-growth, and every bipartisan commission that looked at this deficit problem, Simpson-Bowles, the Rivlin-Domenici Commission, the Gang of Six, all of them said that any new revenue should come in the context of pro-growth tax reform. That's exactly what I proposed, and so I was really disappointed when, after an initially interested reaction from the Democrats on the committee, they went back to their caucus, heard from the most liberal wing of their party, and came back and said, no, need $1 trillion tax increase.
One of the postmortems on the super committee said the Democrats were put off by the Republicans' insistence on making major structural reforms to Medicare. Was Medicare a deal breaker, and did the GOP maybe push too hard on that?
You know, what we said was exactly what the President of the United States has said, that the real drivers of our long-term fiscal imbalance, the deficits and the debt that are completely unsustainable, are the big entitlement programs. The president said that. He's right. Every outside bipartisan group that's looked at it has said that. And so we said to the Democrats, work with us and let's find a solution. Let's find a way to change the way Medicare works so that seniors get the health care that they need, but that Medicare will be there for my kids. And they were unwilling to make any kind of structural changes, any really meaningful changes in any of the big mandatory spending programs, the big entitlement programs. That was a big part of why we weren't able to reach an agreement.
And by all indications, the Democrats' baseline, as you said, was $1 trillion in tax hikes. Is there anything that they could have put on the table that would have made a deal like that acceptable to Republicans?
No, the $1 trillion of tax hike, that's a non-starter. From the beginning, I've said there's two things that we ought to have done on this committee. One is certainly reach the statutory goal of the committee of at least $1.2 trillion in deficit reduction. The framework that I laid out got us to almost $1.5 trillion. It would have exceeded our goal. But equally important, that we, whatever we do, not do harm to the economy. This is too weak an economy. There's too many people out of work. We need pro-growth policies, policies that will help encourage new businesses to start and existing businesses to expand. That's what we need. So I developed a framework that I know would have done that. But it's, you know, it's very different from what the Democrats' view was.